The sky was quiet, but the jungle was not. Strange birds called from the dark trees, and glowing insects lit up the cold fog. Mason walked carefully, his boots crunching on frozen leaves. He was alone, or at least he thought so. The map on his wrist was broken, and his radio gave only static. He had wandered far from his team, deep into the alien forest of Varnic 7. And now, something was wrong. The wind had stopped. Even the birds were silent. Mason froze. His soldier's instinct whispered danger. He turned slowly, looking into the trees. Then he saw it. Something moved, fast and low, shadows between the trees, then a sound twang, followed by a sharp hiss through the air. An arrow, black and silent, struck the tree beside him. Another one came from the left, hitting the ground at his feet, then 10 more. Flying from the branches above, Mason dove behind. A rock, heart-pounding, who was attacking him. The locals, raiders, wild hunters. He had no time to think, only time to move. He pulled out his blade, not a gun. The gun was jammed from the rain earlier. He rolled down the hill, landing near a muddy path. Then he saw something that stopped him cold. A girl, small and thin, with pale blue skin, was standing in the open. She was frozen in fear, her large silver eyes wide. Arrows flew around her, but none hit her yet. Mason's eyes locked onto hers. She looked helpless, like a child, but she wasn't human. Ow. Still, she looked scared, alone, and cold. Another arrow flew straight at her chest. Without thinking, Mason ran. He didn't know her name or her story, but he moved faster than he ever had before. He jumped in front of her just as the arrow flew. Thunk, the arrow stabbed into his shoulder. Deep pain exploded through his arm. The girl gasped, her small hands reaching for him. Mason gritted his teeth and turned his body to shield her. More arrows hit his back and legs. He fell to his knees but kept holding his arms around her. "Stay down," he whispered, blood dripping from his mouth. The girl didn't speak, just stared at him, eyes shining like moons. The forest was full of shadows, now archers moving silently from the trees. They had surrounded them. Mason pulled the girl behind a fallen log, his hand shaking. "I'll protect you," he said, voice low but steady. Even if he died here, he wasn't going to let them take her. The attackers came closer. They wore dark armor and masks made from bone. They didn't speak, just knocked more arrows, ready to kill. Mason grabbed a rock and prepared to fight with his bare hands. His vision was blurry, his breath short, but still he stood, one arm out in front of the girl. "I'm not leaving her," he said to the air, not knowing if they understood. "She's just a child." Suddenly the attackers stopped. Their leader, taller than the others, stepped forward and looked at Mason. He raised a hand, and the rest lowered their bows. The leader walked slowly to Mason, looked at the arrows in his back, then looked at the girl. She was crying silently. Holding Mason's hand, the leader tilted his head, confused. Then he said something in his language, deep and rough. The others stepped back and melted into the trees. The leader looked at the girl one last time, then disappeared into the fog. Mason collapsed, breathing hard. The pain was everywhere, but he was alive. And so was she. The girl crawled next to him and placed her small glowing hand on his wounds. Mason's eyes rolled back from the pain, then warmth, not fire, but something deeper. Soft energy moved through his skin. The bleeding slowed. The pain faded a little. He opened his eyes. The girl looked down at him and whispered, "You saved me." Mason tried to speak, but could only nod. She sat beside him, holding his hand with her small fingers. The sky above was turning dark blue, stars peeking through the clouds. He didn't know who she was, or why those people tried to kill her. But one thing was clear. She was no ordinary alien girl. And now, because of him, they were both in danger. But Mason didn't regret it, not for 1 second. He had stepped in front of the arrows, and he would do it again, even if it cost him everything. Asterisk, the night was cold. Mason sat beside the small alien girl near a dying fire. His shoulder was wrapped in torn cloth, soaked with his own blood, but the pain didn't matter anymore, because she was still there, alive, quiet, and watching him with silver eyes. he finally asked the question that had been sitting in his chest. "What's your name?" The girl blinked slowly, then whispered, "Leary." Her voice was soft. Like wind through glass, she looked down at her hands, glowing faintly with blue light. "I was not supposed to speak to humans," she said. Mason gave a weak smile, too. "Late for that now," Leary nodded, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders. She stared into the fire for a while before saying, "They hunt me because I carry old blood." Mason frowned. "Old blood?" She touched her chest, where a strange mark glowed faintly beneath her skin. "My mother was a queen once, a queen who defied the council. Now they call me cursed," she added. Her words were quiet, but her eyes showed a storm. Mason looked around the jungle again. It was silent, but he knew the danger was not gone. "They'll come again, won't they?" he asked. Leary nodded. "Yes, and next time they'll bring fire." Mason felt the fire's heat fade, and the wind bit through his jacket. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I'll hold them off, and you can run." But Leary stood, her thin form firm against the cold. "No," she said sharply. "You bled for me. I will not leave you behind." Mason watched her walk to the edge of the small camp. She knelt and pressed her hand to the frozen ground, glowing blue. Lines spread like roots across the soil. "What are you doing?" he asked, confused. "Calling the forest," she said. "My bond with it is not broken." Now the ground vibrated faintly, and tiny crystal-like plants pushed through the frost. The air filled with a soft hum. Mason looked around, amazed. "You did this?" Leary turned her head and gave the tiniest smile. "I'm not just an alien girl," she said. "I was born to shape the world suddenly." Mason coughed and fell forward. His body was shaking again, fever burning through his skin. Leary rushed to him and placed both hands over his wound. "Too much blood," she whispered. "You gave too much." Then she closed her eyes. And something strange happened. Her skin glowed brighter, and Mason's pain began to melt. His breath slowed, and the world around him shimmered. He could feel her thoughts, her fear, her loneliness, her hope, and she could feel his when he opened his eyes. Leary looked exhausted. She fell to her knees, breathing hard. "What? What was that?" Mason asked. Leary didn't answer right away. Then she said softly, "I shared my bond with you. You are part of me now." Mason sat up slowly. Confused but stronger than before, he felt something different in his body, like he could hear the trees breathe. "What did you do to me?" "I gave you part of the old blood," Leary whispered. "It will protect you and curse you." The stars above were brighter now. Mason looked up at them and then at Leary. She looked like a normal girl if you ignored the glowing skin, the strange energy, and the secrets in her voice. He had saved her from arrows, but now it seemed she had saved him from something worse. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the forest. Mason stood quickly, reaching for his blade. Leary stood beside him, no longer a scared girl. Now she was something ancient, something hunted but no longer helpless. "They found us," she said calmly. Mason looked at her, breathing hard. "Then we fight," he said. Leary nodded once. "Together," she whispered, and in that moment, under the alien stars, a human and an exiled alien princess became more than just survivors. They became something new, something dangerous. The sun never rose on Varnic 7. Instead, the sky turned a deeper shade of green. The forest shimmered under bioluminescent fog. Mason was breathing fast, sweating, but freezing at the same time. Even with the strange bond Leary had shared, he was still only human, and human bodies break. His wounds had closed, but the fever had returned. He shivered under a thin survival blanket while Leary sat nearby, eyes glowing softly. She didn't sleep. She hadn't blinked in hours, Mason whispered. Weakly, "Leary, you should go." But Leary didn't move. "No," she said simply. "You stayed, so I stay." Her voice was stronger than before, no longer timid. There was something ancient behind her words. Something royal. She stood slowly and walked into the trees. Mason watched her disappear into the fog. He thought she was leaving, but she returned an hour later, her arms full of strange roots
Let leaves.
and blue stones. She dropped them beside the fire and began to crush and mix them with her fingers. A sweet, bitter scent rose from the pile. "What's that?" Mason asked, barely conscious. "Life," Leary said. She placed the wet paste across his skin, pressed a crystal to his temple, and began whispering in her language. Mason felt heat, then cold, then something inside him shifted. It wasn't magic, but it wasn't science either. It was something older, forgotten by most of the galaxy. It was alien memory, passed down in blood. His heart slowed, the pain faded, his vision sharpened. He could feel the trees around him, sense the heartbeat of the ground. He gasped and sat up, looking at his hands. "What did you do?" "I gave you back what you gave me," Leary said. "You gave me safety, warmth, your own blood. I returned the bond, as our kind once did in the old wars." Mason was stunned. He could hear distant movement now, steps too soft for normal ears. He could feel the pressure of watchers in the trees. And more than that, he could feel Leary's presence. Like her thoughts were brushing his mind, he looked at her. "You're in my head," he said. Leary nodded a little. "It won't last forever unless we choose it to." Mason sat still, overwhelmed. But then he smiled weakly. "I guess I'll get used to it." Leary smiled back. "Most don't." Suddenly, the wind shifted. The warmth of the fire vanished. Leary stood quickly and turned toward the darkness. "They're close," she said. Mason didn't ask how she knew. He felt it too. The ones who had shot the arrows were returning. This time, they brought more than bows. Leary crouched low and began marking the ground with glowing lines. "What are you doing?" Mason asked. "Making traps." She replied, "Not all battles need swords." The forest seemed to listen. Roots shifted beneath the soil. Branches moved with purpose. She moved like she belonged to the jungle, like it obeyed her. Mason watched her work and realized Leary wasn't just royalty. She was bonded to the very planet itself. Then a sharp whistle pierced the air. An arrow hit the fire, making it burst in a flash. Figures stepped out of the trees, masked and armored this time. They had blades, ropes, and nets. They weren't hunting, they were capturing. Mason picked up his blade, but Leary raised a hand. "Wait," she whispered. The ground beneath the enemy cracked. Vines shot upward like snakes. Two attackers were grabbed and thrown into trees. Others screamed as sharp crystals burst from the earth beneath them. Leary's traps worked, but there were too many. Mason ran forward, his speed faster than before. He dodged arrows like he could see them coming. His blade found its target. One attacker fell. Another backed away. He moved like a soldier, but faster than he ever had before. The bond had changed him. Leary fought beside him, but not with weapons. She used the world itself. She whispered words in the old tongue, and the jungle responded. Roots grabbed ankles, mist blinded eyes. The two of them moved as one, silent, deadly alive. When the last attacker fell, breathing but broken, the forest went still again. Leary turned to Mason, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. "You fight well," she said. "You cheat?" Mason replied with a grin. They both laughed softly, even as blood dripped from Mason's side. But the bond between them had grown, and now the girl who was once hunted had become a force of her own. Mason looked at her with new understanding. She wasn't a lost child anymore. And he wasn't just a human soldier anymore. They were something different, something old, something dangerous. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The air was still, but the ground was wet with blood. Alien bodies lay tangled in the roots of the jungle. Some groaned, others were silent. Mason leaned against a tree, gripping his side. His breath was heavy, but his eyes were sharp. He was changing, and he knew it. Leary stood beside him, glowing softly under the pale light of the twin moons. She looked calm on the outside, but her hands were trembling. The bond between them was growing faster than expected, too fast. But there was no time to worry about that now. Mason heard a strange hum in the sky. Low at first, like thunder far away, then louder, deeper, closer. Leary turned her eyes upward. "Oh," she whispered. "They've brought a flame ship." A dark shadow passed over the trees. The branches shook from the sound. A warskiff, small but deadly, hovered above the jungle. Its engines glowed red, and smoke poured from its underbelly. A firebomb was hanging from the bottom, ready to drop. Mason's eyes widened. "They're going to burn everything," he said. "They don't want to capture us anymore," Leary replied. "They want to erase us." Suddenly, speakers on the ship crackled. A voice spoke in harsh, alien tones. It was a warning. Surrender the royal child or die with the forest. Mason looked at Leary. She didn't move. "I won't run," she said. "Not again." Mason clenched his fist. "Then we bring it down." He checked his gear. Almost nothing left. One plasma grenade, half a blade, and smoke flares. Leary handed him a glowing stone from her pouch. "What's this?" he asked. "Hope," she said. "Or maybe just luck." The warskiff lowered slowly. Searching for movement, its sensors swept the forest, red lights scanning through the fog. Mason moved silently. Crawling through the brush, Leary moved in. The opposite direction, her hands touching the ground, calling to it again. Then the ship fired blasts of energy, scorched the trees, flames lit the night, and the jungle screamed. Mason dashed between the fire and smoke. He threw a flare, then another, confusing the sensors. The ship fired again, missing by inches from the other side. Leary chanted softly. The ground cracked beneath her feet. Crystals burst upward, forming tall spires glowing with energy. They reached for the sky toward the ship. Crew on board didn't notice until it was too late. Mason used that moment. He jumped from a burning ledge and hurled the grenade straight into the ship's underside. The explosion shook the trees. The warskiff spun wildly. Smoke and flame pouring from its hull, it dropped lower, then lower, and crashed into the snowy earth with a metal scream. Silence followed, broken only by crackling fire. The jungle lit with strange blue flames. Mason limped toward the wreck. Ready for more? But no one crawled out. Leary joined him, her face pale but proud. "You destroyed it," she said. "We destroyed it," Mason replied. "Together." But as the firelight flickered on their faces, Leary's eyes narrowed. She knelt beside the ship and touched a broken panel. Her voice shook as she whispered, This isn't just a scout ship." "What do you mean?" Mason asked. She looked at him slowly. "This was a tracker," she said. "It sent out a signal before it fell." Mason's stomach sank. "How many more will come?" Leary's answer was quiet. "All of them." They stared at the flames. As they died down, the jungle was safe for now. But above them, somewhere in the stars, other ships had heard the call. Warships, hunters, bounty fleets. And they were coming. Mason sat down in the snow, wiped blood from his face. He looked at Leary and smiled through cracked lips. "Well," he said, "at least now we've got their attention." Leary laughed softly, though her eyes were wet. "We are both cursed now," she said. Mason reached over and took her hand gently. "Maybe," he whispered, "but we're not alone." And above them the sky burned red. The first stars of war had just begun to fall. For hours the forest stayed silent. No birds, no wind, not even the trees dared to move. Only smoke rose from the broken body of the alien warskiff. Mason and Leary sat by the wreck, backs against the scorched metal. Every second felt like a countdown to death. Leary stared up at the stars. She didn't speak, but Mason felt her fear in the bond. It pulsed softly in the back of his mind like a heartbeat not his own. "They're coming," she whispered at last. Mason nodded slowly. "I know," he said, "but I called for help." Leary looked at him in shock. "You have a beacon?" Mason pulled a small, cracked metal disc from his pocket. It glowed faintly red. "Old tech," he said. "One-time signal. Earth only. I didn't want to use it, unless I had no other choice." "And now?" she asked. He gave a tired smile. "Now seems like the right time for a while." There was nothing but the crackle of fire and the sound of their breathing. Then the air shifted. The trees bent slightly inward, as if bowing to something greater. The stars blinked. A low hum filled the sky, like thunder wrapped in steel. Mason stood quickly, eyes searching the sky. Leary followed him, her body tense. "There," Mason said, pointing through the smoke. Something massive moved across the sky, like a god dragging a shadow. A ship black, sleek, shaped like a blade. It didn't roar, it whispered. Then it came through the clouds slow, steady, unstoppable. The USS Resolute, a Terran battlecruiser. Old model but still feared across 3 sectors. No music, no warning, no announcement, just presence. Leary gasped. Her knees almost buckled. "That's human tech?" she asked in disbelief. Mason nodded. "Yeah," he said proudly. "And she's angry. The enemy hadn't expected Earth to care, but Earth did. And Earth always sent something loud. The enemy ship's 4 small hunter frigates appeared in the sky, responding to the distress beacon from the crashed warskiff. They opened fire without warning. Plasma bolts lit the sky. Leary flinched. But the Resolute didn't flinch. She moved once. One main cannon turned and fired a single railgun shot. No glow, no flash, just a streak of light, the lead enemy ship. Shattered like glass, Mason watched with quiet awe. The other 3 ships tried to scatter too late. The Resolute moved again. This time her side batteries fired 8 shots. 8 impacts. All 3 enemy ships fell in flames. In less than a minute, it was over. Silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of respect, of power, of a message sent. Leary stared at the sky. Speechless, her voice trembled. "Why would your people do this? For me?" Mason looked at her, his voice calm. "They're not just doing it for you," he said. "They're doing it because I called them. And I called them because I saw a child worth protecting." The Resolute began to descend. Slow and gentle, a shuttle broke off and landed near them. Mason helped Leary to her feet. The ramp lowered, and human soldiers stepped out as alert. Weapons ready, armor shining, the commanding officer removed her helmet, a woman with gray eyes and a scar across her jaw. She looked Mason up and down, then looked at Leary. "This the package?" she asked. "She's not a package," Mason replied. "Steady, she's under my protection." The officer stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "Understood," she said. "Get them on board." Leary hesitated as the soldiers approached. Mason held her hand. "It's okay," he said gently. "They're here for us." She squeezed his hand tighter, but nodded. They walked into the shuttle together. Past soldiers who looked at the girl with quiet curiosity. Inside, warmth and light replaced the cold night. Medical bots rushed forward, scanning Mason's wounds. But Mason waved them off. "Help her first," he said, pointing to Leary. The mid-officer frowned. "She's not human. She's with me," Mason growled. "That's all that matters," the medic obeyed. Leary sat on the bed quietly, watching everything with wide eyes. She turned to Mason. "You changed everything." He smiled at her, even through the pain. "I just kept a promise," he said. "And Earth keeps its promises." Outside the window, the jungle below burned quietly, but above. In the dark space beyond the clouds, the Resolute stood tall and across the galaxy. Someone was now watching Earth very, very carefully. Asterisk the USS Resolute. Cruised through space like a silent beast. Its engines whispered in deep rhythms as stars slipped past the windows. Inside the medical bay, Mason sat upright. Wrapped in clean bandages, the pain was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Not since the bond, not since her. Leary lay on the other bed, quiet and still. Machines beeped softly around her. Confused by her alien biology, they couldn't read her pulse or understand her cells. The doctors gave up. They called for a xenologist. An old man entered the room, tall and thin. He wore thick glasses and walked like someone who had stared too long at the stars. He didn't look at Mason, not at first. He only looked at Leary, and then he whispered, "It's impossible." Mason stood up slowly. "What do you mean?" The man turned, eyes wide. "She's not just an alien child," he said. "She's a remnant." "A what?" "Living piece of history," the man said. "Older than your government, older than our maps, older than our fear." He tapped. The screen and Leary's DNA danced across it. Spirals of light and numbers spun in the air. "She carries royal markers," the man said. "Varellan bloodline." Mason blinked. "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't," the old man replied. "Because they were wiped out before Earth even had satellites." He looked again at Leary. The Varellan weren't just rulers, they were world shapers. Born with power tied to planets, to time, to memory, they didn't conquer by force. They bonded. Mason stepped closer. "Then why is she being hunted?" The old man's face turned dark. "Because if she lives, their control ends. She is proof that something greater existed, something freer." Mason sat down slowly, the weight of truth falling hard on his shoulders. "She saved my life," he said quietly. "She gave me part of her bond. And I think it's changing me." The scientist looked at him sharply. "How do you feel?" Professor Mason said. "Clearer. I can feel things. I know when someone's afraid, like I can hear their thoughts, but not in words." The old man stared. "You're becoming part of her kind," he said, "part Varellan." Mason felt his chest tighten. "What does that mean for me?" "It means," the scientist said slowly, "you're no longer just human. And the galaxy doesn't allow things that don't fit into boxes." Suddenly, the lights dimmed. A signal blinked on the screen. "Urgent, encrypted," the captain's voice echoed over the intercom. "All hands. We've received a demand from the Silkery Dominion. They are requesting we surrender a fugitive royal under ancient war law. They've issued a bounty." "And called her species illegal." Mason stood, fists clenched. "They want her dead." The old man nodded. "Controlled." Mason looked at Leary, still resting, her glow softer now. She had trusted him, shared her ancient bond, risked everything. And now they were hunting her again, this time through legal lies and political weapons. Mason stepped out of the med bay and stormed into the command deck. The captain stood near the front panel, watching the message repeat. "We will not surrender her." Mason said flatly, "She's under Earth protection." The captain turned, calm but tired. "You're just a corporal," she said. Mason didn't flinch. "I'm the only one she trusts," he replied. "And that bond means something." The captain looked into his eyes for a long time. Then she nodded, slowly. "Very well," she said, "but be warned, this makes Earth a target." Mason shrugged. "We've been targets before." Behind them, the stars stretched on. Silent witnesses to a choice that could change history, and in a quiet room, Leary opened her eyes. She had felt everything. The conversation, the danger, the decision. And for the first time in her life, she smiled without fear, because she wasn't running anymore. She had someone who stood between her and the arrows. And now, she would fight for him too. War didn't begin with a bang. It started with silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the universe holding its breath. The USS Resolute floated above a frozen moon, shields raised, weapons armed. Below, on the jagged surface, 3 alien fleets prepared to strike. They had come not to negotiate, but to erase. To erase one girl, and the man who refused to let her die. Mason stood inside the ship's war chamber, suited in combat armor. His scars itched under the plates. The medics begged him to rest. He refused. Across the room, Leary wore a white cloak. Over black armor, it had been crafted from battlefield scraps. Charged with her ancient energy, she looked nothing like the scared child he'd met in the forest. Now she looked like a queen. No, not a queen. Something older, something more. "You don't have to fight," Mason said quietly. Leary shook her head. "You bled for me," she said. "You changed for me. Now I fight for you." The captain's voice rang out over the intercom. "Incoming ships detected. Silkery Command flagship plus 13 escorts. Prepare all defenses." Mason turned to Leary. "Whatever happens, I'm glad I met you." Leary reached out, placing Leary, her hand over his heart. "No matter what comes, Mason, you are not alone." The ship shook impact. The enemy had begun their assault. Blue lights flashed down the halls. Sirens howled. Soldiers ran to their stations. Mason and Leary moved as one, heading for the drop bay. The plan was simple. They would hit the ground before the main battle, strike the enemy's forward relay towers, disable the jammer, and open a path for the Resolute to fire her planetary rail cannon. It was insane. It was suicide, but no one else could do it. The drop pod cracked through the atmosphere like a falling comet and sighed. Mason clenched his fists while Leary sat with eyes closed. Glowing softly, when they hit the surface, the ground erupted in dust and fire. The hatch blew open. Mason rolled out, blade drawn. Leary followed, her feet barely touching the ground. Enemy drones swarmed. Mason fought like a ghost dodging fire, striking fast, faster than human reflex. The bond had pushed him beyond normal, and Leary was untouchable. Every movement she made bent gravity itself, she whispered, and machines shut down. She waved her hand and lightning cracked from the sky. Together they carved a path through the snow-covered battlefield, wounded, burning, bleeding, but never slowing. When they reached the final relay, Mason planted the charge. The structure exploded behind them as they dove behind cover. Above them, the Resolute fired its main cannon. The light that followed was not just a weapon. It was a message. The Silkuri fleet scattered, their flagship cracked in half. The rest of the invaders pulled away, fearful now not of Earth, but of what Earth was willing to protect. After the battle, Mason lay in the snow. His armor was broken. Skin burned, ribs cracked. Leary kneeled beside him, crying silently. He looked at her with one swollen eye and managed a weak smile. "You okay?" he asked, voice rough. Leary nodded, then whispered, "You're hurt," he chuckled. "Blood on his lips, worth it," he said. Every scar. She leaned close, placing her glowing hands on his chest. Warmth returned, pain faded, but some scars stayed. They always would, and Mason didn't want them gone, because they told a story. A story of a man who stepped in front of arrows, of a girl who gave him her trust, of two broken lives that became something powerful together. Weeks later, back on Earth, the two stood before a quiet crowd at a peace summit. Leary spoke first. "I am not a weapon," she said. "I am not a threat. I am proof that trust is stronger than blood." Mason stood beside her. He looked at the cameras, at the alien leaders, at the world watching. "I didn't save her because she was important," he said. "I saved her because no one else would. And if I had to do it again," he smiled, "I'd take every arrow again." The crowd stood in silence. Then applause, then peace talks, then change. Leary squeezed his hand gently, and together they walked forward, not as soldier and refugee, not as human and alien, but as two beings who had earned something no one could take, not even war,